Well, ladies and gentlemen, I asked you guys to ask me about the 2024 election here, doing another little Q&A video. This one is based around the election. We've got about a dozen questions here to get to. We will start with Conservatron. What a name that is. Any guesses on what the October surprise will be? Well, it seems like everyone, at least right now, thinks the real October surprise is going to be Kamala Harris stepping in for Biden. Me personally, I don't know if it's just I'm so disassociated from the general electorate, but like, how does that even do anything for her? I guess it gets her media coverage, but it's just like the idea of her, okay, now she's the president for like a week. What does that really do? I don't understand. Like, what is the purpose? But like, that's what everyone's saying. Biden's going to step down. I guess it will give them press if they do it in like mid-October. It could potentially drown out any negative October surprises against Kamala, because we know right now Trump has a huge advantage in terms of the potential October surprises. Remember, in 2020, they had nothing on Trump. The only October surprise was the Hunter Biden laptop story that was shut down due to liberals saying and telling Zuckerberg that there was going to be misinformation and it was Russia, when in reality it was actually real, and Zuckerberg confirmed that it was real in a letter to Jim Jordan. But what I'm trying to say is they had nothing on Trump in 2020. Maybe they're hoarding something from the Iranian hack that they might deploy here in the next few weeks. They had the J.D. Vance dossier that got released or whatever it was. But to me, it's going to be all pretty much nothing burgers. I mean, with Trump, you hit him with anything. I mean, he's already gotten crushed with so much stuff, and it's at this point, it's like, what else can he take? It's not really going to have much of an impact, is what I'm saying, unless it's something crazy. And in that sense, it's like they would have had to have found it within the last 4 years, because if it was something crazy, they would have deployed it in 2020, which they did not. So I think the real October surprise is probably going to be something along the lines of Trump going at Kamala, maybe the Willie Brown tapes. I know people have been joking about that, but probably more so within Kamala's campaign and the way she treats people that work for her in particular. There's a book coming out, apparently. It's going to talk about how Harris is very nasty to those around her, and it's been reported that a lot of people have been fired, that work for her, and they just quit because they can't deal with her. Now, will that actually have an effect on the election? Who really knows? But I don't think there's going to be a huge October surprise when it comes to that. This next question is from Nuki Head. Wow. He says, this is a harsh question, but I want your opinion on it. Do you think we're on the verge of another civil war? And so to answer this question, it might be a little bit of a cop-out, but there's no way for me to predict a potential civil war just because we've never seen a comparable event in the United States. You could say, well, the first Civil War, but that was such a different time period. Now we've got the internet. It's totally different. We've got much more sophisticated weapons, much more sophisticated warfare. Whenever I get asked this, I always say, I think the worst thing that could happen would be maybe some infighting in small pockets in bigger cities to where the entire country would be put on shutdown for a time period. But I don't think we'll see a widespread, full-blown Civil War event lasting months on end. I don't think that would ever happen, just based on where we're at now in terms of, the 21st century, in terms of 2024. I don't think, it would be horrible for the United States no matter what. A Civil War, I think, most likely would happen if Donald Trump were to be killed. But even if that happened, I don't know, man. Imagine if it actually, because it was close to happening, so who knows? But even if that happened, I don't think we would be headed towards another civil war, but the United States would be in a horrible, horrible, horrible spot if something like that happened. There's no doubt about it. The next question we have from Cam Smith. Which news outlet, if any, will you be watching, following for up-to-date results on election night? Well, I should be streaming. I'm hopeful on election night I'll be streaming, obviously. And so normally when it comes to the elections, believe it or not, I do watch CNN, mainly because I like their graphics package the most, but I will flip through all of them. But I'll mainly stay on CNN. Obviously for me now it's different if I am going to be streaming, which I hope to be on election night. What I want to do is I want to set up some type of war room where I get this huge monitor and I can get like 7 or 8 different tabs on the screen. And one of the tabs, we'll have like 7 or 8 different things. You're going to get the New York Times ticker, which tells you who's winning based on, the votes and everything like that, on how it comes in. You get the betting odds. The betting odds are going to be good to look at up to the date, up to the second updates on that, on who's winning in terms of those. And then also, obviously, in terms of the state-by-state predictions, I would like to set up some type of an alert thing. I don't know if you guys know, when like a team scores a touchdown in college football and then they update it at the bottom of the ESPN ticker. I wonder if you could kind of configure something to where you take CNN, you take Fox News, you take MSNBC, you take ABC, you take CBS, all the major callers, and you can get like an alert up to the second on when a certain state gets called, because normally what happens is you'll get one of the major networks taking the plunge and calling a swing state before all the other ones. But in general, I think I'm just going to be kind of following it all, mainly. That's what the way I would answer that. Music Therapy says, how many paths to victory does Trump have in comparison to Harris? I last heard he was trying to box in. Is that still feasible? Well, this is very interesting because this year, I followed the 2016 election, the 2020 election. I'm younger, so I didn't really follow the 2012 one, but I would assume it's the same thing, to where in those elections, the Democrats always had 50 paths, the Republicans had one. Well, now it's a little bit different. I really think Kamala Harris has one path, and that's through the Rust Belt. Now, technically, she can win some type of concoction where if she's able to steal North Carolina, maybe keep Georgia, and then take Wisconsin, she could lose Pennsylvania and still win. But the general sense is based on where we're at right now, and the key thing now is the fact that Ohio and Florida are both Republican states. Florida's not a swing state anymore. That really does box the Democrats into the Rust Belt. And so Trump could lose the entire Rust Belt and still win the election. Certainly that wouldn't be ideal, but Trump does have a number of different paths, especially if you include Virginia now into the mix, which might be a possibility, although we still need to see more polling out of there. But you're talking about winning the Rust Belt, you win it. You're talking about winning Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, you win it. You're talking about winning Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, you win it. I mean, there's a number of different things that, well, actually, I'm not sure. You might need another state after that, but there's a lot more paths for Trump. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, just in terms of that in general, like who has more paths, doesn't mean Trump's guaranteed to win. Personally, I think Trump's going to win, guys. Like, let's be honest. I mean, you look at these campaigns and the way things are going, I think the Trump is in a very, very good spot. I know everyone is nervous and things like that. I'm really not nervous. I think Trump's going to win, like 99% chance, honestly. But in terms of like who has more paths, you can't really get caught up into that. It's good that Trump has more paths, but remember, Hillary had 100 paths in 2016. It didn't matter. So it's like one of those things where it's like, yeah, we can talk about it, we can analyze it 100 times before the election, but then the election actually happens and it's going to play out in whatever way it plays out. Certainly you want to have more paths, and this is very rare with the way the Electoral College is working this time, because Florida and Ohio are not swing states, and that gives the Republicans a significant leg up compared to where they were 2020, 2016, 2012, 2008. It was a lot harder. We've got this from Kevin. What assurances do we have that we will have better safeguards in place for an honest and secure election? Well, I think the biggest safeguard is just the fact that people are ready for it now. Remember back in 2020, nobody really knew what to expect when it came to, I thought the election was going to be called on the night. You're talking about if we, 2 or 3 a.m. back in 2016 is when it got called. If you look at 2 a.m. in 2020, Trump was, he was winning every single state. It's just the way the votes were counted, nobody was ready for that. Everyone was caught off guard. Now you've got so many more poll watchers. You've got the Republicans. They've hired a bunch of people to really vet this election, and I think it's going to be a lot safer when it comes to that. So it's going to be a lot harder for them to cheat as well, just because there's less mail-in, significantly less mail-in ballots. And I think the overall vibe is, even if it's not called by 2 or 3 a.m., we're going to have a very good idea on if Trump wins or loses by around 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's kind of the vibe. It might not be totally called, but because they're already saying it's going to take multiple days in states like Wisconsin, but we're going to get an idea based on North Carolina, because North Carolina should be called, very early. Even remember when Trump won it by a point, everyone knew Trump was going to win North Carolina. I believe, if I remember correctly, at 3 a.m. in 2020. Georgia took 4 days, but obviously Florida's a state that's going to be called pretty early, we would expect as well. Pennsylvania is a bit of a problem. Some of these states are going to take a while, but we would expect the vast majority of the vote to come in quicker than in 2020. And then also when it comes to the cheating, it's just such a doomer mentality to say, well, they're just going to cheat. Well, what's the point of even voting then? You can't really think like that. Trump won in 2016. He can win again in 2024. That would be my opinion on that. The next question from On the Fire 420. If they were able to unalive Trump, what happens? Does J.D. Vance step in somebody else, or does the win go to Harris? Well, that's a good question, because you would think, obviously, if this happened in July, it would just be, if J.D. Vance was already picked at that point, J.D. Vance would step in. But I don't know exactly what happens, because they've already sent ballots out, and people are doing early voting and mail-in voting with Trump as the head, and then Vance is the VP. So I'm not sure. You would imagine that the process would be Vance would step in and then pick a new VP, but I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, I think we would have much bigger problems than worrying about the events. Like if that actually happened, because the country would be in such a bad spot if Trump did actually, get assassinated. We would have much bigger problems than worrying about Vance and who's going to win it would be a big, big civil unrest within the country, and we would have bigger issues. Miguel says, at what age did you get into politics and why? Well, it would be probably when I was around 15 years old, because it was 2015, and it was because of the 2015 Republican, or I guess 2016 Republican primary, but it started in 2015, and it's funny because what a primary that was. I don't think we'll ever get another primary like that, but I do remember kind of following some political stuff in like 2013, 2014. When you're that young, it's like, eh. But it was the primary. It was really Trump announcing, and then the early debates in 2015, and then going into 2016. And it was very competitive with Trump. Jeb Bush was leading at the start, and Trump ended up taking over, holding the lead. Ben Carson made a run. You had Ted Cruz kind of as number 2. Rubio was 3. And what a primary that was. We really haven't seen a primary like that, and I'm not sure we will. Maybe in 2028, I don't know, but probably not. Chucky Boy says, % chance Trump is alive on election day. Well, it's hard to give I think it's probable. I would say like 85 to 90, honestly. 85 to 90% chance on that. We've got Clone Gamer. How much do you like J.D. Vance? Well, I can understand why Trump picked J.D. Vance. That's what I will say. There's been a lot of second guessing from people on the Vance pick, just because in terms of the electorate, it really doesn't help you. Also, when you look at the Walz pick, I don't think it really helps Harris either, especially in Minnesota. But Vance doesn't really help you in Ohio. You could have picked someone like Tulsi, kind of balanced the ticket better. You could have went with Youngkin to try and take Virginia. But Vance kind of fits the mold as a MAGA type, as a fighter, the amount of interviews he's done. He's very well spoken. Obviously, my opinion on Vance might change tomorrow when it comes to the debate. That's going to be a huge part. Not that the VP debate's really going to change anything in terms of the actual election, but for the VPs, it's very important. But the fact that Vance goes everywhere, he'll go on CNN, he'll go on MSNBC, he'll do all these things. I think he's, well spoken. Unfortunately, the problem is the left and that media brigade was able to label him and really define him, which hurt his approval rating and his likability, or I guess it wouldn't be approval, it'd just be favorability. It hurt his favorability rating, and it really hasn't recovered. We'll see how that, not that the favorability rating really matters with Vance, or honestly for Trump, as long as Trump keeps it within like -5 or -6, he's doing fine. Even -9 or -10 is not a big deal for Trump. But I think with Vance, I don't mind Vance. It'll be interesting to see how he does during the debate. I certainly think he's way better than Walz just in terms of public speaking, so he should have a big advantage in terms of that. It's obvious. Walz, it's been reported he's very nervous, and he is not a good debater. He's told Kamala Harris that, apparently. So I do like Vance, and I can understand why Trump picked him over someone like Rubio, who's maybe a little bit more coy, maybe not as aggressive in terms of arguing for the MAGA movement and that type of culture. With Vance, it seems like he's a little bit more in your face, and I think Trump likes that type of attitude. Next, we've got Reg, who says, would mass migration eventually turn Texas blue? And if it does, will there ever be another chance for a GOP candidate? Well, it's going to be very interesting what happens with Texas this cycle, because in 2016, Trump won it by about 9.5 points. In 2020, Trump won it by about 6.5 points. Or was it 5.5? I think it was around 6 points. And so 2024, to be honest, based off of what happened in between 2020 and 2024, the entire migration of liberals to cities like Austin, cities like San Antonio, the suburbs surrounding it, Houston, you would figure that this is going to be a very close state. Now, the good news is the polls are not showing it. The polls are still showing Trump being up by around 6 or 7 points, which was the margin that he won it by in 2020. What a massive victory that would be for Republicans. If you get the pandemic happening, California losing all this population to Texas, and New York losing all the population to Texas and Florida, and you're still able to you're able to expand the Florida victory, and you're going to be gaining electoral votes with the next census, but that's not for another 6 years. But with Texas, if you're able to keep around a 6 or a 7 point win, that's a huge victory based on the amount of liberals that have come into that state. But it is a big issue, obviously, if it does become a lot of people do think eventually in 2028 or 2032, it will become a swing state because it is trending that way, to be fair. I mean, you go back to 2012, 2016, 2020, the margin's gotten closer, and now you get more liberals influxed into the state from the last election in 2020. It should be like within 3 or 2, you would think, but that's not what we're seeing in the polls. We're seeing, I know there's a few polls that have Ted Cruz losing. I think Ted Cruz is probably going to win by 4. Trump's probably going to win by 6 or 7, which is a huge win. You can't say Texas is then going to, I mean, we just had migration and they kept their lead, as long as that's what it turns out to be, a 6 or a 7 point victory for Trump in Texas. To me, I find that a little bit hard to believe just based off of what we've seen recently in Texas and how close it's gotten, and now with the migration coming in. But if they're still able to maintain that 6 or 7 point lead, you're not going to be talking about that state becoming purple because they're obsessed with saying that in 2028. If it's a 6 or a 7 point victory, you're not making that up, especially with a state, the population the size of Texas. You're not making that up in one election cycle. It does become an issue, though. Republicans would have to look to flip. I don't know. I know there's been positive movement in New York, but in terms of electoral votes, if you lose Texas, maybe New Jersey, New York combo, but it's going to be very hard because you make up 10 or 11 points in New York. We saw what happened in 2022, the crazy shift to the right from all those suburbs surrounding New York City and New York. Trump is probably going to only lose New York by about 12 points. He lost it by 23 in 2020, and he still lost it by like 20 against Hillary in 2016. So it's going to move like 10 points. Now, that's not really within shouting distance. You need to get it within 10, and maybe New Jersey gets within 7 or 8, but if you do lose Texas, you're going to have to look to a place like, I really don't know, maybe New York, maybe New Jersey, somewhere along those lines in terms of that. Next question we've got from Daniel. Why isn't anyone talking about how bad Harris is doing in Oregon? Look at the polls compared to Biden's win in 2020. Would it be a far reach? It would be a far reach, but do you think Trump could win that state? No, I don't. And one of the reasons nobody's talking about polls there is because really nobody's doing polls there. I think that, I don't know what poll you're referencing. Maybe there were a few polls that had Oregon. There was one poll that had Biden up by 2 in Oregon before it dropped out, which was pretty crazy. But maybe there was one poll that had Harris up by 5 in Oregon. I think maybe that's the one he's referencing. The problem is nobody's doing polls there, and I really don't see that shift, or I really don't see a crazy shift in Oregon happening. Now, I do think when you compare 2020 to 2024, Trump's going to perform a lot better. Oregon is a state, if I remember correctly, it really shifted left from 2016 to 2020. Like, the Dems gained like 7 points in that state. Like, it was a 10-point win to a 17-point win or something like that. And I think it goes back down. But it's just not going to, there's no way it's going to happen. There's no way Trump's going to be able to steal that state unless we get like this crazy polling. I would like to see at least 2 or 3 more polls out of Oregon just to see, but I would expect like probably a 10 to 11 point lead for Harris in that state, similar to Washington State, honestly. Why is Nate Silver's model so high on Kamala? That's from Ryan. Well, it's really not just Silver's model. It is all the models in general. It's 538. I think, there's an update that I look at. I think it's interactive tweets or something, interactive polls. They tweet out stuff, and they have like 7 different models they follow. And from what I saw, the last update, maybe it's different now because of the Pennsylvania movement, but the last update I saw, Trump was losing 6 of them, which makes no sense. And it all comes down to how they weight and how they grade these pollsters. But if you just factor in the idea that Trump in 2016 and 2020 has routinely, it's not like, oh, it's one year he did better than the other. 2016 and 2020, Trump significantly overperformed the polls both times, no questions. And so now the polls are basically saying Trump's got like a 51% chance to win, but the models are saying he's got a 43% chance to win because they're weighted. It's like they weight the worst polls. If you have a poll, and we see this with Quinnipiac and 538, they've been the worst poll since 2016, but they're graded out as like a B+. How is that possible? If they're inaccurate, they can't be a B+. It just makes no sense. So I think the way they weight certain polls is a big problem, and that's going to end up biting a lot of these models if it continues. How much would I have to pay you to watch Morning Joe for 24 hours straight? That would have to be like 10, 15,000, 24 hours straight. That wrecks another entire day because my sleep schedule's ruined. You're watching Morning Joe. I'm not going to be able to make videos. That's going to cut into my revenue. Come on now. You're going to have to give me like 15 to 20,000 for that. Biggie Cheese says, this is the last question. Senate prediction. All right, so I'll just answer this really quickly. I'm going to say 53. It's going to be 52 or 53 seats for Republicans. Ohio's going to be a win with Moreno. Montana's a lock, obviously, West Virginia. And then I think they probably get one more. Arizona's unlikely, but it's possible if Trump wins by around 4.5 or 5. It seems like Kamala is punting on that state. And then maybe if it's not Arizona, because Lake is polling behind Trump significantly bad, maybe it's Pennsylvania. So it's either going to be 52 or 53. If you want to be safe, it's going to be 52. If you want to be, maybe he gets another one. Maybe Trump's able to influence it in the Rust Belt's one of those Senate races. It becomes 53. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.